So our next speaker is Emerson Souza. I got the opportunity to have dinner with him last night, and I understand he's originally from Brazil and has been in Minnesota for about the last 7 years. He's a researcher. He's also out of the Department of Soil, Water, and Climate. And his research work extends into developing and refining nutrient management strategies in order to increase yields, nutrient efficiency, and environmental quality. So please help me welcome Emerson.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So thank you for the introduction. So since he said, so I'm being here for 7 years. I start to work with Dr. Carl Rosen. I'm now working for Fabian. And today I'm gonna talk about our current project where we want to manage nitrogen using PSNT, pre-side address nitrate test, as a way to manage. I also would like to thank the collaborators. So without their data, this project would not be able to be conducted. So let's move. Okay. So before I start, I'm going to talk a little bit about the background. So as in other states, in Minnesota, the nitrogen management comprises an application of the nitrogen rate pre-plant or at planting or split applied with an application with a side addressing season. But how can we know how much nitrogen we're going to apply? That's why soil nitrate test is a viable tool. Okay, so just to keep going. So to have the ideal nitrogen rate, we do recommend the use of soil nitrate test before season. But we have to keep in mind that we are gonna take that sample and have the results from the amount of nitrogen we had at that time of sampling. So that's why nitrogen is challenging to manage, because if anything happened, especially in coarse soils, so the amount of nitrogen will change. So we recommend you take the sample and go after to get your results as soon as possible to adjust your nitrogen management, nitrogen rate. So, and that's because of many factors such as precipitation, type of soil, previous crop, organic matter, especially the ratio between carbon and nitrogen can change the amount of nitrogen that will be mineralized during the season. So that's why you have to keep in mind that you need to take samples from season to season. Even like within your land, you have to be careful and take samples in different places. And do not use the results from your neighbor, even if he is your brother. So you both have like close lands, but if you have one more rainfall event in your land and he did not have, so the results will be different. And before I start talking about PSNT, I wanna just to make a comparison with pre-plant nitrate test. So that practice we perform before season. So that's the third time I've been present these results, and talking with some extension agents. So they mentioned that the grower likes to take all the samples before season to have everything done. So I agree with them. So to be aware of how much nitrogen they're going to need for this whole season. But if you want to implement a pre-season nitrogen test, you have to be aware that you're going to have conditions for nitrate to accumulate. And one of the main factors to influence it is the precipitation. So in this diagram here, I took it from the Minnesota Extension website. So for example, if you have corn, even if you manure, and if you have great precipitation, we won't have with just a negligible amount of nitrate left for the following season. So, and what we access when we take samples pre-season. So basically it's the nitrogen that was carried over from the previous cultivation, release it from soil organic matter, from the mineralization you had like during the interseason, and from the crop residues, and from manure applications or any other source you may had during the last season or during the interseason. Oops. So now start talking about the PSNT. So we are doing this work because we believe that we can skip that period under which the nitrogen is under vulnerable conditions to be lost. So we can measure what you're going to need, whether we're going to need or not to supply corn with more nitrogen. And it's more because we sample right before corn starts, like the great nitrogen uptake rates. So it more accurately indicates how much nitrogen you need, and you won't be losing this nitrogen to the environment. Because once corn starts to uptake it, the greater rate, so you basically won't have much losses, even if you get like a lot of rainfall through nitrate leaching. Oops. So some tips to take samples for PSNT. I know most of you are aware of it, but it's going to be recorded, and many people want to learn it since the beginning. And soil samples should be taken in areas with different corn stands. We know growers, so things does not work like everything right as they planted. Sometimes they have to plant 2 weeks before another area in the same land, and different stands, and you're going to have growth stage in one will be in V4, another will be in V6. So you have to sample your soil in different in that specific areas. And again, you have to be aware of what you had in the past in that land. It was like in the west side you had like corn following soybean, in the east side you had corn following corn, so you have to sample those areas differently. And the nutrient management you had in the past, you had manure in some areas, or you didn't have, or the nutrient management that you are going to conduct this year. So take samples in different areas. And changes in slope. So we know that you have significant change in the slope. Some areas will be more vulnerable to nitrate loss. And please sample before corn start the great nitrogen uptake rates, or you are going to be losing the time and you're going to spend money and you will not ensure the grain yield anymore. So I put here a sample from 0 to 1 foot, but you may find many recommendations for corn. So everybody works with corn, so they have their own idea, but the major recommendation I found was 0 to 1 foot. Even in the experiments I have conducted in Becker and in St. Paul, we used this depth, and we got response. The budgets of nitrogen came out with quality of data, and I would recommend go with from 0 to 1 foot as well. And again, to compare PPNT and PSNT, in this graph, just to emphasize when corn starts to their greater rates of nitrogen uptake from the emergency to V10. So if we have a lot of nitrogen applied there, the uptake will be like, the requirement is not that much. So if you have like an event that can leach out your nitrogen, so you're going to be losing it. So, and differently when you have PSNT, you go in the field. For this particular presentation, I'm going to talk about sampling PSNT at V4, because it's going to give you some time to to adjust the rate and organize everything if you need to do a side address. So you go, for example, at V4, and then you sample the soil, and then, for example, if the recommendation is to have, just pretend here, is to have like 20 ppm at this time of season, and you have 15, and then you can adjust and supply the corn to ensure the grain yield. And that's why PSNT, we believe it's more accurately determines available residual nitrogen than pre-planting. So, so just again to emphasize, like when you have, this is an experiment in Becker in coarse soil. It might be a different reality from what you have here. But in 2018, we got 2.5 inches of rain 7 days after V2 when we applied nitrogen. In 2019, we had like a well-distributed rain events. And you can see in 2019, basically did not have any nitrate leaching. Even compared to the check control without no nitrogen, we did not find an increase. But in 2018, we found like it went up to like 100 milligrams of nitrate per liter in the water below the root zone, which means that the water that the corn is not going to be able to reach anymore. So it's going to end up in the groundwater. So one rainfall event, so after the nitrogen side address. So, and if you don't do anything else, you're just going to be overestimate how much nitrogen the corn will have for the rest of season. So that's why you have to pay attention in those events as well. So why we are accessing PSNT? So the modern nitrogen recommendation is not yield goal anymore. As John mentioned in the previous presentation. So before many other research, so we just used to go in the website and again, just pretend and how much should I apply to get 200 bushels per acre, and then you found a recipe there, some amount of nitrogen, and then you're gonna get this amount of yield, but it's not that anymore. So you need to be more specific. You have to consider the resource we already have in your land, and the climate we have, the weather conditions we have there. And also, in Minnesota, the groundwater protection rule outlines the steps to reduce nitrate contamination. So I think today they're gonna give some updates on these regulations. So we don't know, so more restrictions may come, and you have to be aware of how much nitrogen we need to apply in order to avoid the excess fertilization and minimize environmental contamination. And of course, ensure the profitability for the growers. And the University of Minnesota, they encourage to use PPNT. They do have a lot of information there. So if you go there, you're going to find some recommendations according to the regions. And that diagram with precipitation I took from there as well. But they don't have information on PSNT. That's why Fabian came with this idea with conduct a project like that to update. We also have data from PPNT to refine what they already have there. And because even if you follow the recommendations of University of Minnesota, you are going to get response, you are going to avoid some excess of fertilization, but the recommendation was based in research conducted nearly 40 years ago. So we don't know, corn may respond better to nitrogen nowadays than 40 years ago. So that's why you need to refine and help everybody to avoid excess and more costs with nitrogen fertilization, and give the right recommendation along with PSNT information. So what are the applications of PSNT? So what are the applications of this project in particular? So we wanted to have a database. So we already have it. Thank you the collaborators that kindly sent the data and of existing corn grain yield to prior to or at planting or in-season nitrogen fertilizer rates under different conditions we have in Minnesota. So with that, we want to evaluate how can we adjust the nitrogen rate using that PSNT critical value. So how can we give the growers and the industry, how much do they need to supply if they get less soil PSNT level than the recommended one. So that's one of our ideas. So hope we can have this response soon to put in the website and help the grower, maybe put some calculations there, just the grower needs to enter their number and get the result according to the information they have in their land. And also develop BMPs for soil nitrate testing. So we do have data from different depths and different periods in season that we took sample or analyzed and evaluate how much credit we have from the previous cultivation of nitrogen and everything to adjust nitrogen rate and avoid excess of nitrogen fertilization and ensure corn grain yield. So how are we assessing the whole state PSNT information? So I was asking the other conference if I took those samples. No, that's impossible. So we have data from about 2,200 site years and samples about like 4,000 samples that other collaborators sent to me. So their technician, their students took those samples and they analyzed and they sent me those data. And for this project, we are focusing in see the response when you take the samples from the first 1 foot depth and collect it at V4. But we also other information to include. And along with this data, we ask them to send the location where they collected soil and soil type and texture, everything, all the information they have, organic matter, soil pH, and nitrogen management they had there, source, timing, and place of application, and crop system, and grain yield. Without grain yield, we cannot do the correlations. So after we present this information in other conference, so somebody recommended us to avoid use experiments that had just one rate because it may compromise the response curve. And we remove this data and we are using for this presentation and to finalize our analysis data sent with at least 2 nitrogen rates. So we are going to conduct a meta-analysis basically we are going to use most of the environmental and management scenarios. We call scenarios different characteristics we have in the state. And the critical PSNT level will be estimated when we correlate relative yield in response to PSNT increase concentration. And I'm going to show you a figure in one of the next step slides, so you can better understand what I'm trying to say. So what we will look at, so we are going to be comparing. So with all the data combined, we have Minnesota PSNT, critical PSNT level, which was about 14 ppm. In case we wanted to compare with the other states, so we have our state critical level according to all the specific conditions we have here. But for the information within the state, we're going to compare this whole state data generated critical level with different scenarios. For example, if you have a different critical level in corn following soybean, so from the what we got from the entire state data from the state, we are going to develop a new guideline under that conditions. And if you have like corn following corn and corn following wheat, they had the same pattern, so we don't need to develop a new guideline for that condition and make a recommendation combining both of them. So use the same number when you have corn following corn or corn following wheat. Just a example here. And everything depends on the data size. If you don't have enough data size, we are not able to adjust a curve and get that critical level. So for this presentation, I'll be showing critical PSNT level as influenced by previous crop. So we have corn after corn and corn following soybean, especially because under this difference, we can get some amount of nitrogen credits from different crop systems we had before. And soil drainage conditions, I'm talking about the capacity of the soil has to be permeable. For example, if you are not aware, so it depends on the permeability of the soil, so it can influence corn growth and also generate and increase chance to get environmental contamination. So, for example, poorly drained soils, they limit root development, and when you get them very wet, so they lead increasing nitrous oxide emissions via denitrification. So well drained would be that soil that would keep the nitrate available for enough time for corn to use it. Even if you can lose some nitrate under those conditions, so that soil would be the ideal for corn to use the nitrogen applied or available in the soil. And excessively drained are those soil, the very coarse soil that you can easily lose the nitrate, especially via nitrate leaching. And we also have another two scenarios when you are going to grow your corn under conventional and source supply or enhanced efficient fertilizers. So for conventional source, we are looking at urea, AA, and UAN. For enhanced efficient fertilizers, we have those conventional source with some kind of nitrification inhibitors, urease inhibitors, and also ESN in those data. So experiments that use this kind of source. So because conventional source, they are more susceptible to reactive loss. And because those enhanced efficient fertilizers, they can be more stable under certain conditions compared to conventional source. So although they are not very good to increase yield, but they can ensure yield under conditions that conventional fertilizers could not. So that's why we did this. And I also combined the data by region. So we have data combined from Southeast. Thanks, Jeff, for sending this data. And Southwest and West Central. And Northwest from the Red River Valley, and from the Sands region and Mississippi Valley. So most of the data came from Becker, but we also have other data from the nearby regions, so which is very representative. So here is just to emphasize the drainage effect. So this is a work from Fabian. They conduct under a soil classified as a poor drainage. They had tile drainage and did not use tile drainage and other treatment. So in the year where they had a lot of rainfall in June, so we can see the difference compared to the drained soil and undrained soil. A lot of nitrous oxide emissions flux they increased during June compared to the other treatment. So although it's a very low amount of nitrogen lost, it's in kilos here, it's about 2.5 kilos. And it double the amount of nitrous oxide emissions. So, and as I said, so we have to take care of the environment and more restrictions in the future, so they may be looking at this as well. And in here are the curves I mentioned before. So as relative yield increase, when it stopped to increase, we call it critical nitrogen level, nitrate, in our case, PSNT level. And for the whole state, it increased until 14 ppm, and then doesn't matter how much nitrogen you have beyond this, the grain yield will not increase. So that's our critical level. And to demonstrate how I compare with the other scenarios, I separate the data from corn after corn and corn after soybean, and it also generate a little bit different number. For example, after corn, it was almost the same because most of the data came from that rotation cultivation system. And after soybean, the result was a little bit lower. So I summarize this data in the following slides. So it's just to demonstrate why we need data that has at least 2 nitrogen rates to have that curves. And so here I summarize the data, and N means the number of samples we had for this particular scenario. Across the state so far, we have almost 4,000 samples. I still have a little bit more, but I'm pretty sure that results will not change. And that trend, we're gonna keep that trend. Corn after corn, the recommendation would be the same, 14.2 ppm, but when we have corn after soybean, you don't need to have as much nitrate available in the soil as you need for corn after corn. Okay. So under drainage effects, as I mentioned before, so well-drained soil would be that soil that would give enough time for corn to uptake the nitrogen. So it requires about 10 ppm, which is way lower than excessively drained would be those soils, coarse soils. And that's, I think that's the main explanation, because under excessively drained soil, so we have most of the soils are very coarse, so you can easily lose nitrogen via nitrate leaching. So you need to have more nitrate available in order to supply corn. And poorly drained and whole state did not have any significant difference, but well drained showed to be a pretty good soil to conduct corn production, and we don't need as much nitrogen available as you need for excessively drainage soils. And another information, I think it's pretty good information. When you want to go and implement an enhanced efficiency fertilizer, you don't need to have that much of nitrogen available as you would need for conventional N source. So we don't have any specific guidance for this kind of management. I think that would be great to dig deeply into this information and give you, for example, the economic information, if it's worth it or not. And for the environment, I'm pretty sure it's going to be good. And now by region and sands, because sands is, we have most of the excessively drained soil, we demand more nitrate available in those lands. And Northwest and Southwest also demand more than the whole state. I'll be honest with you, I still get information about those regions. I'm not familiar with corn production there and here. And I have conducted my experiments mostly in Becker. And it's an ongoing project, although we are in the last third of the project. I still need to get those information. So as I said, the work is ongoing, more assessments such as sampling depth and soil ammonium test. We also have some data from ammonium test to include in this project to see if we get a response and get you a recommendation under these terms as well. And growth stage for PSNT. Today I showed you the collected V4, but we have plenty of data for V6. And some data for V2, V8, and up to V12, we have some data. I don't know if it's enough to estimate the critical PSNT level. And data from experiments with one rate was not included in those analyses. So I want to include them just to see if we're gonna get that difference or not. If not, we're not include them. So it can be more representative. And in V4, we don't have enough data to compare sites with or without manure. It's unfortunate, so that would be good to have that information. I'm gonna look at V6 if we have enough data for it. Hopefully we have, but looking at my database, we have just a few sites. And if you are watching us, and if you are here, if you have those kind of data, it's welcome. Still have time to include them. And so with that said, so far what we have observed is that field following the cultivation of soybean require about 10% less soil available nitrate than those on corn cultivation. And PSNT level, with a PSNT level of 18.6 and 9.7 ppm, excessively drained soil and well-drained fields require about 33% more and 31% less soil available nitrate than that number we computed from the whole state and nitrate test. So fields fertilizer with enhanced efficient fertilizer require about 12% less soil nitrate available than those receiving conventional nitrogen source. And corn cultivated in the Northwest, Southwest, and West Central, and sands require 9 to 13 more soil available nitrate than the recommendation for the whole state. And while this research is ongoing, so I believe the trends will not change, and our results clearly show that we must have specific guidelines for certain conditions, and that's our objective here. Hopefully soon we are gonna have results to put in the website or to publish it and to give people to validate it in other experiments. So with that said, I would like to thank you, the collaborators. So without their data, they kindly sent to me. Special thanks for Fabian, the mind behind this project, and the University of Minnesota for the facilities and everything. And a special thank you to MDA who support this project. So that's it. If you have any questions, so